بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In this video, I'm going to be teaching you the basics of CSS. I'm going to try to share with you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned in the years that I've used CSS. Hopefully by the end of it, you'll be confident enough to style any HTML document that you come across. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So in front of me here, I've got a HTML file that I've created before the video. It's just a boilerplate, nothing special. I would recommend that you follow with me if you want to get the most out of this video. It's just, like I said, this is the HTML boilerplate. You can literally just type HTML and then enter, and it'll set it up for you. I'm using Sublime text editor. But the first thing I'm going to run through is the three different types of embedding CSS into your HTML. So the first one that is not recommended at all is to add inline CSS. Let's say we have a tag of paragraph and the content is Word. You would add a attribute called style, and then you would add the specific style that you want to add to it. Let me just view this on the browser. There you go. If I was to change that to 100, you would also see the difference. There we go. That's one way. The other way is to add a style tag within the HTML. So an opening tag and a closing tag of style. Then you have an attribute type, which is text/CSS. I believe it will work without this, but it's good practice to have this in. And then if you write the same thing here, so you would basically select all the paragraphs by typing P. These are called selectors, and open bracket, close bracket, and within this object-like notation is where you would add the values or key values. So we'll put 100, and we'll just remove this to see that it still has the same effect. As you can see, nothing's changed there. I'm gonna very quickly remove all of this. There we go. The third way of adding CSS into HTML is to create a link and basically link your new CSS file to your HTML document. So you would create a separate CSS file and link that to the HTML using this link tag, which would have a href pointing to the file. So let's say we have a file in folder CSS and the file is CSS. Let's not name it CSS, index.css. So it will go into CSS, the CSS folder, sorry, and look for this file. And there's also a attribute called rel style sheet, I believe, style sheet. Yep. And then just closing that tag off, and that should link to it. I'm not going to create a separate file because we're going to use this method of having a style tag. But if you were literally to copy everything within this tag and put it into a separate file, then link this file, it would still work the same way. Feel free to try it, but we're sticking with this method. So let's start with the this selector, which basically selects everything in the document. It's just a star sign. I'm gonna create a div and I'm gonna add to it. Just a second. Actually, I'm gonna create a P as we were, a paragraph, and then write I'm huge inside. I'm also gonna create another P and call it before I call it, I'll add content to it. I'm gonna add I'm italic, and another one, and I'm gonna write I'm bold. So like I said, this star sign is a selector for all of the elements within the body. So it will basically apply any styling that you add in these brackets to all of the elements. So we're gonna have a font size of, let's say 10. Actually, yeah, let's do 10 px. Px stands for pixels. You have different units that you can use, but we're sticking with px for this tutorial. I'm huge, I'm italic, I'm bold, and all of that is sized at 10, just to show you that it is working. Everything is changing when I change it to 12. Okay, so we need to make this one huge. We're gonna give this a attribute ID of P1. We're gonna give this an attribute ID of P2, and we're gonna give this an attribute ID of P3. Inside the I'm huge, I'm gonna also add a span and write I'm tiny, so that we can target that too and change the style to tiny. So the way you would select an ID in CSS is to use the window sign or the hashtag, and then just write the name of the ID. So this will target this, and if I copy and paste that and change that to 2 and again to 3, we have this, and this all selected separately. We want to change this to huge, so we're going to change this to, or style this to 100 pixels. We're going to style this to italic. I think it's font style, italic, and then P3 I'm bold, font weight, bold. So these are all different keys that you can use to style elements. You can look at the various keys that you can use online. But I'm going to try and cover as much as I can with you, or at least the things that I usually use on a day-to-day basis. So I think we've covered P1, P2, P3. We just need to style the span. Let me see how it looks before I do that very quickly. So we have I'm huge, it's very big. I'm italic and I'm bold. I'm going to change the huge because it's a bit too much. So 50. Now we just need to change this to I'm tiny, because right now this is not very tiny. It's the same as these two. So to do that, we have the span within the paragraph of ID P1. So how do we select that? We can do a P1, and then we have a selector which is greater than, which basically means this is the child of, we need to give this an ID as well, tiny. Then we can select tiny. So this basically says that this is a child of this, or this is the parent of this. You'll find tiny inside of P1. So let's change that to font. I don't want to make it too small, but I think 20. Let's change this to 30. That will make more sense. Maybe 10. There we go. So that is now tiny. This is the biggest, and we have an italic and a bold. All right, I think that's quite simple. I'm going to move on to the next part, which is moving the objects around the page, or the text around the page. So if I want to align this to the top of a line, or the bottom of a line, or the middle of a line, how do we do that? I'm going to create a div. Do you know what? Let's stick to paragraphs. I like paragraphs. What can I say? I'm going to give it a class of a top, which is just going to stand for align to the top. And I'm going to write I'm aligned to the top. I'm going to copy paste and change this to middle. I'm aligned to the middle, to the top. Yeah, that's fine. I'm aligned to the bottom. Change this to the bottom. There we go. Just to, so it makes a bit more sense, I'm gonna add of a line. I'm aligned to the bottom of a line, to the top of a line, to the middle of a line. Okay. And then we're gonna select them up here. The way you would select a class attribute is using the dot annotation. So dot which stands for class, and then a top. I'm gonna copy and paste just because I can. Middle, and then bottom. Right, I think so far that's good. So what we're going to use here is display flex, and we are going to choose a direction for that, which will be column. And I'm going to just give it a height of 100 as well, and a border 1 pixel solid gray, and I'm going to justify the content to the center. I'm going to try to explain all of this to you, but let's just have a look at it very quickly. So we've done the a top. Okay, that's not aligned to the top of the line, so let me just check. That's because I put center. If I put flex start, which will align it to the top. Okay, so display is basically the way you would like to display an element. So you have flex, you also have grid, but we'll also cover we'll cover that in a second. Let's start with flex. I think flex is a 2-dimension way of aligning things on a page, and grid is 3-dimensional. For now, flex does the job. This should be column. Yep. I'm going to copy and paste all of this to middle, because we basically want the same thing, but we don't want to flex start when we want to position it to the center. So you can see that's aligned to the middle. Copy that again and paste it. We want to center it to the end, so flex end this time. That should align it to the bottom. So as you can see, we have text aligned to the top, to the middle of a line, and to the bottom of a line. That's good. Flex direction is the direction that you'd like the flex movement to appear. So you could have row, for example, and that would be from left to right or right to left. Column is from top to bottom. So if I was to use row and change this to start, flex start, it would take it to the very start of the row. If I use end, it would take it to the very end of the row. So instead of the left, you have it to the right. But we want it to be top to bottom, so we're using column. Hopefully that makes sense. It's actually quite straightforward once you get used to it, so it just requires a bit of practice and you'll be fine. What's next? Shall we stick to divs, or shall we move on to divs? I think we should. Yeah, let's do some divs. I'm gonna try to create a few shapes. So we'll have a circle, we'll create a box, and we'll also create a circle but colored as red. Okay, let's style these. So we have a class circle, so dot circle, open close brackets. Usually a circle is very simple to create, really. You just need to give it a width, a height. We give it a border just so that we can see what we're looking at. If I was to remove these borders, then you wouldn't be able to tell where's the top of the line, the bottom of the line. So if I was to comment this out, that wouldn't really make much sense. That's why I have borders. And while I'm at it, for you to add a comment in CSS is basically a slash and then a star sign. Add your comment and close it off. Excuse me. And that will basically just be a comment in the file and it wouldn't appear on the front end. With that said, let's go back. We have a width of 50, height of 50. We want a border 1 pixel solid red. I should have probably explained this, sorry. The border gets multiple values. The first being the width of the border, and then the type. So you can have, I think, dashed here as well. Solid is what we're using, and then the color of the border. So just to explain, just to show you visually what I mean, this is the width of the border, so we have 10 here, so it will just be a very thick width of border. And we can also have dashed, I believe, so you see that's dashed instead of a solid. But yeah, feel free to play around with that. Let's go back to the circle. That does not look like a circle. We need to give it a border radius of, I'll give it 50%. There we go, that looks more like a circle. And then we also have a box that's missing. So let's do box. The box will be, I'll give it another 50 to 50 ratio. Width 50, height 50. We need a border as usual. This time I'm going to make it 4 and then make the color black. Margin we haven't covered yet. We'll get to that. Giving it a background color of light gray. Let me see that. There we go. If I was to remove the margin, so margin is basically the space between the outside of the shape and the corners of the page. So if I was to give it a margin 10 and then refresh, you'll see it moved 10 pixels away from the side of the page. And just to give you a better visual, if I was to select this element, you can see the orange color down here. This is basically the margin. It represents the margin. So if you give it one value, it will apply 10, or it will apply that value to the top, to the right, to the bottom, and to the left. You can also give it separately, so you can have a margin top and give it a value, margin bottom, give it another value, margin. So you could do them separately, or you can group them this way. If you have one value, it will apply that to all 4 directions, but you can also set each value here. So you can have a margin top 10, a margin top right, a margin right 20, and then you have margin bottom 10, and then margin left 10. If I check that, you'll see 10, 20, 10, 10. Let's just make this 50. You have 10, 20, 10, 50. So it's top, right, bottom, left. But if it's just one value for all 4, you could just use this short method. And then you also have padding, which is the space between the outside of the space between the border and the inside of the element. So if I was to change this to padding, you'll see that the space inside has increased. So this green space is the padding. All the content will be inside this box here, and the padding will be the space between that box, or this box, and the border. I'm gonna give it some content just to show you what I mean. This is what I mean. Whoops. The box is not big enough to hold all of this, but that's fine. Do you know what? For the sake of it, I'm gonna give it a 10 pixel. There we go. So the space between this text and the border is 10 pixels. If we change that to 50, you'll see that the space between the content and the border is now 50 pixels. And again, this has the same way of doing things. You can do it separately, method left, sorry, not method left, but padding left, and then 10, padding top 20, padding bottom 50, and we're missing just one, padding right 10. I'm giving them random numbers up, please forgive me. If you check it, you'll see that at the bottom here you have, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but let me zoom in. There we go. So you have 20, 10, 50, 10. Or you can write the short way, or use the short way, which is top, right, bottom, left, with px at the end of each one, or whichever unit you prefer. For this example, we're just sticking with 10 pixels. There we go. And we don't need any content. That was just to demonstrate. We're done. Okay, the circle, we have a circle red, so we need a red to have a background color of red. There we go. I think that's it for shapes. You could try to create different things like rectangles and triangles, but this is the very basic that I wanted to cover with you. Okay, what else do we need to cover? Let's stick to diffs again. We're gonna have a div just to demonstrate the widths. We're gonna have a half width and give it a content of I'm 50% the width of the page. Another one and another one, and I'm gonna give it 25%, and you can have 75%. 25, why can't I spell? 25 underscore width, actually percent makes more sense, and then 25, this is 75, 70. Okay. I'm gonna copy both, dot. We have a half width, sorry, I'm just selecting these ones. So we have a width of 50% here. We have a width of 25% here. And we have a width of, what is it? 75%. Now, just so that it can be visually understood, we need to give it some borders. 1 pixel solid red, 1 pixel solid blue. Actually, do you know what? Let's finish this first and then increase the width of the border, and then gold. I'm going to change this and this and this to 10. There we go. Make this full. You've got 50% of the entire width, you've got 25% of the entire width, and you have 75%. If I was to resize this, you would see that it would the width would basically just become responsive with the size of the window. So this is one way of making your design responsive to the size of the screen using percentages instead of pixels. I think that's fairly straightforward, but just in case you're struggling with this concept, this is basically 100% from this side to this side. So this is 50%, this is 25, and this is 75. If a screen is this big, this is 100%, this is 50, 25, 75. I'm pretty sure you guys got it. So let's move on. I think we should add some images. Do we have images? We can get images. We want to center an image, so we'll give this center, we'll give this div a center class, and inside of it we'll add the image. Image usually takes a source. I need to find a source, 1 second. And we'll give it a class of image style. So if we select, we select center, and then we give it a text align center. It's just this, it's purely to style it. It says text align, but you can use it for objects as well. And then we have a image style that we're trying to select. Now the image style, we want to give it a circular shape, so we use border radius 50%. And then what else do we want to give it? Well, we have to give it a height and a width usually, but we'll just give it height for now. And then that means the width will be 100% as well. Let's see how this looks. Okay, that's quite big, but it's centered, and you see this circular shape. If I was to remove this border radius, this is what it would look like. For borders or border radius, you can also do the same thing of selecting each side separately, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right, or you can group them together. But here we're applying the same value to all of them, and it's just 50%. Do I need a margin? Let's see. I think it's just this, yeah, just a spacer from here. We'll add a margin. Okay, so next I'd like to create a rectangle, and inside of it I'll have a circle again, but this time I want to position the circle in the center of that rectangle. Let's give it a class of circle and center and see how that looks. Okay, we can't see anything yet because we haven't styled it, so we'll style rectangle and give it a border 1 pixel solid black. We have to give it a width or a height at least. We'll give it 400 pixels, and we also need to give it a position relative so that the child or any child's of rectangle will take into account the rectangle's position. Great. So now we just need to position this right in the middle. There's multiple ways of doing it. The easiest way is to disregard this position, give this a display flex, and then justify content center, which will bring it to the center here, and then align items center and align it here. That is the most efficient way of doing things, but sometimes this doesn't really work because of the complexity of the file that you're working with or other styles that already exist in the file. So another hack that I usually like to use, or I've learned to use over the years, is to use a position relative here at the parent level, and then in the child level, which is circle center, we would have a position of absolute, and we would use a top 50% and a left 50%, which should move it 50% to the left, or from the left, and 50% from the bottom, from the top, sorry. But still, as you can see, it's not really centered, so you just have to push it back a bit using transform translate -50%, -50%, and that will just realign it back to the center. The last thing that I wanted to cover with you before we wrap up is the display grid. So we'll have a grid div here, and inside of it we'll have the divs with a class box. So we'll create 3 boxes, and that's one thing, and the other one is div class grouped box, and we'll create again 3 boxes in here. So now to the styling. We've got group box. Let's start with this. We have a margin of 20 pixels, which is for the top and the bottom, and then for the right and left we have an auto. We'll have a width of 50% of the screen, a border of 4 pixel width, solid, and a color black. We'll have a display flex and a flex direction of row, so it should be left to right. If you wanted to align the box from top to bottom, this would be column. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so this is the one that we've styled. I think that's that for this one. For the grid, I think I named it grid, did I? Yes, I did. You want a display of grid, and then for the grid, we usually have a grid template columns, which is how you, or where you would define the division of the columns, how you'd want it to be divided. So we want it to be divided by 1 fraction each. So you could have 1 fraction for each box. We have 3 boxes, so each box will take 1 fraction. Let's go to the bottom. As you can see, this has 1 fraction, and this has 1 fraction, and this has 1 fraction. If I was to create a template column with only 2 of these 1 fractions, we'll have 1 fraction, 1 fraction, and we'll jump to a new line, 1 fraction. So there's another shorthand to write this exact same thing. For every line, we want a repeat of 3 1 fractions. So this is equivalent to this. And again, this is basically just saying on each line we want it to be divided by 1 fraction. Each child should be, or should have, 1 fraction of the space available to it. There we go. We want to center it. We'll do a margin auto. That did not center it because it doesn't have a width. So we'll give it a width of 70%, and that should center it, because now it's not 100% anymore. That looks good to me. I think that covers it all. Let's just give it a border so that it's, you know, a bit more apparent. Yeah, that looks fine. I can't think of anything else, or can I? We could do with centering these boxes within this rectangle. So we'll do a dot grid, and the child of the grid, which is div, we want to give it a we want to justify the content to center. I think it's justify self, not content. So we justify self to center. There we go. So it basically centers each item. If I was to highlight it so you can see the grid better, as you can see, you have the portions. This is 1 fraction, this is the second fraction, and each item is centered, whereas before it would be to the left of the rectangle. So I could change center to flex end, and that should center it to the right of the fraction or the space that it has available to it. Flex start is the default, and center is what we wanted. I think that covers all the basics. With this, you should be able to, you know, style any HTML to your liking. I would recommend that you pick any website that you see online that attracts your eye, and try to just basically mimic it for practicing purposes. Just create the HTML that you see without writing any styling to begin with. Just lay it all out and then style it one by one and see if you can replicate what you see online. I've found that to be the best practice, or the best way to practice CSS is just to try and copy a site that already exists. And usually if you could do one, you could do the rest of them. So yep, I think that's it for this video. I hope you have benefited from it. Give me a shout if there's anything I can help you with. Do like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you'd like to see moving forward, and I'll be happy to help. Till next time, see you.